This is Ron Evans. Ron Evans was on Apollo 17. This, I believe, is one of the most remarkable experiences in human history. He climbed out of his Apollo spacecraft, and he was 230,000 miles from Earth. If he turned in one direction, he saw a small Earth hanging in the sky. And if he turned the other direction, he saw a massive moon, huge, over here about 10,000 miles away. Massive, massive moon. Only a few people in history have experienced a spacewalk like that. This is the actual strap that Ron Evans used to secure the film canister so that it wouldn't float away in space as he retrieved it on this Apollo 17 mission. This is part of my collection. Yes, I am one of the biggest Apollo geeks on the planet. Absolutely fantastic stuff with the Apollo Moon program. And just to prove it to you, here's a picture of my living room. And yes, that is a lunar module descent engine sitting in my living room. I have a very patient wife to allow me to collect all of these things. And of course, I've got the Apollo blog. You got to have one of those if you're a huge Apollo geek. And I had an opportunity over the last decade or so to interact with many of the men who walked on the surface of the moon. Amazing experiences at dinners, at events. This particular event I had a chance to go to. There on the left is Buzz Aldrin, part of Apollo 11, the first lunar landing mission, and on the right is Alan Bean. The fourth man to walk on the moon as a part of Apollo 12. And as I was talking to these heroes, I talked about marketing. How did we convince the American public to do this audacious thing, to send 12 humans to the surface of the moon, which cost 4% of our national budget for an entire decade and 2% of our national workforce for an entire decade? And the answer was it was marketing. We had to sell the program. And I was talking to my friend Rich Jurek. Rich, would you stand up? Rich is now my co-author. Rich, wave to the crowd. Yay. Rich is a B2B marketer, one of us. And I said to Rich at the Apollo 12 40th reunion, why hasn't anybody written a book about marketing the Apollo program? And I'm like, duh. Okay, let's write it. So we decided to write about the greatest marketing case study in human history. And it has a remarkable amount of B2B marketing in it. And I'd like to tell some of those stories. It's got an amazing reception since the book came out. We've actually sold film rights to Robert Stone, so it's going to be a movie as well. His last 4 films premiered at Sundance. After Apollo 11 took off, blasted off, Wernher von Braun, the rocket scientist who basically invented the Saturn V rocket, said nothing. As they were going to the moon on Apollo 11, he said nothing. As they landed on the surface of the moon and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were safely on the moon, Wernher von Braun said nothing. As they went out and walked on the surface of the moon, he continued to say nothing. Finally, after they took off and after they were going back to Earth, safely going back to Earth, the next day, July 22nd, 1969, he spoke to the assembled press in a room much like this, to an audience much like you, and said, without public relations, we would have been unable to do it. As Rich and I were looking at the different aspects of Apollo, we found a number of things that had incredible parallels to what we're trying to do today. The first one is managing fear of real-time communications. What we learned is that there were many, many people who were fearful of real-time communications during the Apollo program. These were people who came out of the military, for example, people who came out of traditional forms of communications. And in Rich's collection, Rich is also an Apollo geek collector like I am. In Rich's collection, he has this remarkable document. It was written by Paul Haney from NASA Public Affairs, arguing passionately for the inclusion of live television on the Apollo program. And Alan Shepard, who was the first American in space and the chief astronaut at the time, he said, no, we're not going to do that. And he's marked up this letter, and he's basically said, no, I don't want my astronauts to have to be performers. I don't want them to have to be television producers. We're not going to have cameras and live television on the Apollo program. And it became a fight. And basically, Alan Shepard's like, come on, let's take it outside. And this is a remarkable document, had never been seen before, and basically showed the differences. Fortunately, there were other people who were passionately arguing for live television and live communications from Apollo. Sounds a little bit like today, doesn't it? You've got some people, sometimes the executive suite, saying, no, we can't do that live Twitter stuff, the real-time stuff. And you've got other people passionately, like many of you, arguing for it. The same parallels we saw. Here's a remarkable footage from CBS News just prior to the Apollo 10 mission. And Gene Cernan, who was on Apollo 10, along with Tom Stafford, also on Apollo 10, passionately argued to have live television brought on the surface, to the surface of the moon, live television in the spacecraft. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Gene Cernan and the other members of this crew generally list a more basic reason for their support of onboard television.
I feel very strongly, very, very strongly, that this program is one which belongs to you and your great-grandmother and your children and the children of people sitting out there, as well as to myself. I've been fortunate enough to be able to be a direct participant in it, but I'd like to be able to, not me, but let me say we would like to be able to give and share part of what's going on, part of the history that's being made in our lifetime, in all of our lifetime, right now with a lot of other people.
Cernan's enthusiasm for television is only part of an increased effort by NASA officials from the top down to sell their program.
This has been a CBS News special report.
So remarkably, by passionately arguing, we got live television on the moon. And it's the same thing that we're doing today, passionately arguing for real-time communications in our companies. The same thing is going on. As a result of this, people were able to see it. This is at JFK Airport as Apollo 11 was happening. Look at all the people seeing what was going on. Here, this has just happened to be a TV that was set up in one of the shops at JFK Airport. Everybody taking a look at it. And we ended up with incredible video as a result. So that's why Rich and I chose to have Gene Cernan, this is Gene Cernan 45 years later, have Gene Cernan do the foreword to our book, Marketing the Moon. And it absolutely was a feat that was as remarkable as getting to the moon. I'm going to show you now one of, I think, the most interesting videos that came out of Apollo. It's the liftoff of Apollo 17 from the surface of the moon. And what they did was they took the lunar rover, put a camera on it, parked it a couple of 100 meters away from the Apollo spacecraft, and then they had to have Ed Fendell, who is in Houston, actually rotate the camera to follow it up. But there's a 2.5-second delay from the Earth to the moon because of the speed of light, and he had to do it in such a way to be able to capture it. Let's take a look at this incredible video, which we never would have seen unless people had passionately argued for live television on the surface of the moon.
Push. Mission arm is destined. Okay, I'm going to get the pro. 99, proceeded, 3, 2, 1, ignition. Burn away, Houston. Vector grid. Ag start. Pitch over. Here you have good thrust.
So we'll geek out just a tiny bit more. This is a checklist that was in that lunar module as it was taking off that they used to help them to pilot that spacecraft. Fear was the thing that meant people said, no, we don't want to put live television in the spacecraft. Fortunately, the cooler heads prevailed. This is my favorite advertising from the entire Apollo program. The day after Apollo 11, they did their moonwalk. VW puts this out. It's ugly, but it gets you there. Oh my gosh, you got to love that, right? And so B2B companies are doing the same thing today. They're managing their fears of real time, managing their fears of getting things out there instantly. This is Boeing, by the way, built some components for the Apollo spacecraft. And this is now. This is today. This is their site. They do a lot of really interesting real-time things. They're, of course, on Twitter. @Boeing is their main Twitter feed, although they've got others. They do real-time communications from air shows. This is the Dubai Air Show of 2013. They send people from the company, marketers, to in real time communicate to people from these sorts of shows. And you might remember the 787 had some problems with batteries catching on fire, not something you want to have happen when you're on an airplane. It was a crisis, but in real time, live, they managed the crisis. They allowed people to communicate. They communicated back. They held live press conferences for people, not just the media, but for anybody. They managed their fears of real-time communications at Boeing. Another lesson from Apollo for B2B marketers is brand journalism and how brand journalism tells a story. NASA had a very small number of public relations people and marketing people who worked at NASA on the Apollo program, and they relied on literally hiring journalists to help them, to hire journalists to create the content that the media and that consumers would be able to take advantage of. So Jack King, who we interviewed for the book, who was a NASA public affairs officer, said the core contingent of NASA PR people, just about all of us, were ex-newsmen. They hired print reporters, broadcast reporters, artists, people to do video in order to create content for the program. And these were the people that then interacted with the media. Again, parallels to today, the idea of brand journalism, the idea of companies like yours hiring journalists onto your team to create the sort of content that will be interesting to people. NASA had an entire filmmaking division. And these were some of the films. They're sort of dated now, but some of them are quite funny and some of them are quite interesting. NASA films that were sometimes used. Those of you who are perhaps my age might have seen these in our elementary school. I remember they would wheel in the old television and they'd show us these sorts of things when we were in elementary school. This is a remarkable document that was created. It's about 150 pages by journalists to create this sort of information. This is the idea of brand journalism. Raytheon, another B2B company, also happened to build components for the Apollo program, today uses this idea of brand journalism. They tell stories on their website. They tell stories with their content. They use ex-journalists to do it, and they do it in real time. Brand journalism is a great way to tell a story. This is a really interesting infographic that they created at Raytheon. Same idea of what NASA was doing during the Apollo program. This is the brand journalism team at Raytheon. And for example, I'm standing next to Chris. He's a ex-Pulitzer Prize, ex-AP wire service reporter who's won the Pulitzer Prize. And he's now a marketer at Raytheon, hiring journalists. Journalists create the story. Another lesson from Apollo, fantastic lesson, is strategic partnerships. Getting together, specifically in the case of Apollo, industry and NASA, so government and private contractors getting together. NASA had a very, very small public affairs and marketing department. It was for the scope of the program. They had 3,000 accredited journalists for the Apollo 11 mission, for example. They couldn't possibly have done it without an amazing partnership with the contractors, Boeing and Raytheon and Grumman, and the companies that made smaller items like Omega watches or Sony tape recorders, or yes, we all know it and love it, Tang. All of these organizations helped to market the Apollo program, helped to make sure that American people were behind the program, helped to make sure the media was covering it, helped to make sure that Congress funded it and that the American people were behind it. I believe, Rich, would you agree that I have the largest collection of contractor press kits from the Apollo Moon program? I know it's an incredibly small niche, but I love these things. This is a Harris Apollo 11 press kit, and I think I have the largest collection of press kits. I mean, fantastic. Today we would call them infographics. They've got in here, maybe we'd call this an Instagram. It's a photo. They've got, maybe this would be called a blog post, their press releases. Fantastic information in these things. And there are hundreds of them. This is just a shot of several of the press kits that I have in my personal collection. And this helped to market Apollo. The idea of partnerships between the private contractors and the government in the form of NASA. The contractors even got together to make a press room where they were able to entertain, ply them with alcohol in some cases, provide them coffee in others, the reporters who were covering the program, and it was all put on by the contractors. Of course, what the contractors hoped is maybe they would get a mention in one of the stories. Then, this is a modern equivalent of an app. Here is an app. What it is, it's basically a slide rule kind of device for visualizing complex data. Data that was, for example, delivered as ground elapsed time needed to be converted back into what time is that today, things like that. And these were generated for reporters so that they could easily figure it out. This is made by a company called TRW. Here's one similar thing made by Raytheon. These are apps. 45 years ago, people say, oh, apps are a brand new thing. Well, this is an analog version of an app. Grumman and the other spacecraft manufacturers made models that could be used by journalists. Here's an Apollo 11 model, and Uncle Walter Cronkite is using it on stage. Partnerships between NASA and industry. Fascinating stuff. Then, of course, those contractors can talk it up. B.F. Goodrich made tires for the machine that carried the Saturn V rocket, so they're going to talk about it. TRW. What was TRW also making? Weapons of war for the Vietnam War. They don't want to talk about that so much to the public, but they love to talk about the fact that they helped us to get to the moon. Strategic partnerships today happening all over the place. This is just one example I yanked out with Apple. When we're asked about this program, yeah, there was tons of stuff that went well, but there was one aspect that didn't go so well, and that was when they were marketing Apollo, they totally marketed it as a quest story, as an ultimate goal, as we're going to get to the moon. And this happens so often in B2B marketing. We have a product launch and everything's aimed at the launch. We've got the launch date, and then we kind of forget what happens the next day. And that's what happened with Apollo. What happened with Apollo is John F. Kennedy, in 1962, September of 1962, delivered this amazing speech at Rice University. Let me just play a moment of it for you.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
It was a great goal, and we achieved it. But the reason that we're not on Mars right now, the reason we've been stuck in low Earth orbit with the space dump truck, the space shuttle, is because we didn't know what was next. And we didn't articulate what was next. And we only talked about the goal of getting to the moon. That was a mistake. So as you're doing your marketing, if you have these big, audacious goals, that's fantastic. But what comes next? Gene Cernan was talking to us, and he's like, you know what? We've done something pretty cool, but where do we go now, Columbus? And we never answered that question. which is disturbing to someone who's a space geek because it means we haven't gotten anywhere else cool in 45 years. The final idea is that you can achieve the audacious. Apollo was incredibly audacious. 1960s technology. It seems even more unreal now than it did at the time. 1960s technology to land 12 humans on the surface of the moon, bring them all safely back. We had a little glitch with Apollo 13. They didn't actually land, but they came back. It was audacious. The idea of live television on the moon was audacious. You have to have an audacious goal. This is an image of the guidance computer for the Apollo spacecraft. This is 1K of memory from the Apollo spacecraft. Can you imagine 1K of memory is bigger and heavier than my many gig memory iPhone? It's incredible that we did it with this kind of technology. Achieve something incredibly audacious. And that's the idea here. You can do the same thing. I believe this to be the most important marketing tool ever devised. I think Josh would agree. I think Richard would agree, the last two speakers. This is an incredible device. You've got one in your pocket, not necessarily an iPhone, but your mobile. You've got one in your pocket. I've had a great opportunity to experience some interesting things as I've traveled around the world. In fact, yesterday I was in Istanbul, Turkey. I traveled 30 hours all day yesterday to get here. And there's interesting things going on in Turkey. They kind of banned Twitter, then kind of didn't ban Twitter. This was last year in Cairo, Egypt, and I went to Tahrir Square. In Tahrir Square, they used these devices to bring down a government. Twice. Amazing, right? Just with one of these devices. This is Bangkok. I was in Bangkok in January. They used these devices to bring down their government. It actually just fell in the last couple of weeks. And what was interesting in Bangkok about this whole thing was, a lot of my friends and my family, my wife said, "Are you really sure you want to go there?" It was like in the middle of a coup going on there. And I go, "Yeah, I want to go, I've been lucky. I went to Cairo, no issues. I'm going to go to Bangkok, no issues." And there were no issues. In fact, the biggest issue, I was told when I asked people on the ground, the biggest issue was that there are so many selfies being taken that it regularly brings down the mobile phone network and the Twitter network because everybody's doing selfies. Here's an example of one which I just love. Can you imagine? They're taking pictures with the people. I didn't get quite that audacious with my selfie, but I did do a selfie. Last year, I was in Kangandi in Cunayala, Panama. This is a remarkable place. This village of 300 people used to be located by the side of a river. It was the best place for their village because it was on the side of a river. It was their water source. They moved their village 2 years ago from the side of the river, 1 kilometer up to the top of a hill. They moved it because that was the only place in their area that had mobile phone coverage. They moved all 300 people, they moved their huts, they moved their animals, they moved their farmland. Now they have to travel 1 kilometer to the river to get their water. This village does not have electricity. They charge their mobile devices with a solar system. This village does not have running water. Yet they have mobile phone coverage. It was considered the most important thing for the village. More important than electricity, more important than running water, was having that coverage. It's completely transformed their village. Now the kids partly use these devices for their education. Now the adults, when they want to sell their kava roots, they no longer paddle down to the Pacific Ocean along the river and go village to village trying to sell their kava roots, and having people say, "No, I'm sorry, we don't want them," and having to go back without selling them or selling them at a loss. Now they do a deal ahead of time on their mobile device for their kava roots, go down, the deal's done, they come back, transforming the village. This village has no electricity, this village has no running water, dude has an iPad. And this is the remarkable moment we're in today. The entire world, practically, is on these devices. And as Josh said, and as Richard said, and many other people have said, these devices have incredible, incredible power. This device is 2 million times more powerful than the guidance computer of the Apollo lunar module, which got us to the surface of the moon. What are we going to do with this power? So I'd like to ask Gary to come over here. We're going to play a little game. Actually, not a game. It's more like some fun and games. I like to jump off stages. It's just one of my things. Okay, and I didn't hurt myself. What we're going to do, Gary's help, and everybody's help, we're going to do a selfie. Everyone's talking about selfies, right? Oh, there's the selfie and the Pope and the selfie at this place. Well, let's do one. If anybody wants to be in one, please join Gary and I up here. We're more than welcome to join. Is anyone going to join? Tim Washer will join us. Anybody else who wants to join can join. We got to do it. Yeah, great. Okay, we got. Excellent, excellent. All right. Everybody ready? This is an Oscar-worthy selfie. All right, oh, that's good. We can wave a little bit. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Did it work? That one worked. Okay, now I got to get it out onto. Thank you, everyone. Now I have to get it out onto Twitter. We are a real-time conference here, aren't we? All right, let's get it out. Anybody who sees themselves, please retweet so we know who you are. This is my subtle way of getting engagement. You figured me out, right? Okay, yeah, right. So he's the dude who went like, oh, wow, everyone else is talking about selfies. Let's just do one. This is Audacious Power. Hopefully it's out. Does anyone see it yet? Hopefully it will be out shortly. This is the audacious power that we have in real time to create a moment. This is the audacious power that we have in our pocket that's more powerful than what got us to the moon. Marketing the moon is an amazing story, but you're going to have even more of an amazing story because you have much more technology at your fingertips. The greatest barrier to doing this is that 4-letter word that begins with F. It's not the other word, it's fear. You can get out there and you can make it happen too. Stop making excuses. I'm David Meerman Scott, and this has been Marketing the Moon. Thanks very much.